Hey guys, welcome back to another video. In this video, I'm going to be talking about the French defense in chess. So, the French defense, it's a really good opening for all levels, but it's especially good for beginners because it will grow with you as you learn more, and it's going to just become stronger. And it's also pretty full of strategies, and it will help you later in the game. It's not one of those openings that will lead to a quick um, defeat for your opponent, and it's not gonna give you a really quick win, but it's gonna give you a lot of advantages to help you later in the game. So I'm gonna talk more about this opening later. So let's get started. Alright, so the French defense, you might have seen this before. So basically, it starts out with white having the center. So starts out with e4, pawn e4, and then pawn e6. And basically here, black is kind of giving white the center so far. So pawn d4. And then now black strikes with pawn d5. And now there's multiple ways that you go from here. So, well, there's two main ways, and then there's smaller branches from those two main ways. So, first, white might be doing maybe something like knight c3, and then black would do something like knight f6, because that black pawn on d5 is sort of in danger. And then white will take this opportunity to move his e pawn up to attack the knight and also closing in the center. And then the next way that could be proceeded from here is knight d2, and then basically the same thing, knight f6, and then pawn up to e5. Now, these all fall into one main position, which is two black pawns on d5 and e6, and two white pawns on d4 and e5, which would end up like this position. Now, that's the typical way that the French defense proceeds. And once this happens, here's the strategy for how white would probably want to proceed and how black would want to proceed. So notice that the pawn chains, there's miniature pawn chains, and they're facing different directions. For white, the pawn chain is facing the black king side position, so white would probably want to attack on the king side. On the other hand, there's a black pawn chain from f7 to d5, and that's pointing in the queen side direction. So black will want to attack on the queen side because the direction that it's pointing in kind of means that you have more space on that side. And it's going to enforce your attack on that side, the pawn chain. So black will definitely want to take this extra queenside territory, and he could do so by moving the A pawn, B pawn, or C pawn up, or he could develop or bring his black bishop on C8 to D7. Just trying to push all his forces on the queen side. But not only does he have the opportunity to attack on the queen side, but black will also be able to strike at white's center, starting with the D pawn. So he could do C7 to C5, attacking the D pawn on D4, or he could attack the E pawn, which this move might be slightly weaker. F7 to F6, kind of exposes the black king a bit. So, but that also kind of disrupts white's center. Notice that black sort of does not have a lot of space compared to white. I mean, it's sort of equal, but the pawn chains are more towards black side. Um, so black probably will want to proceed with something like c5, pawn c5, attacking that d pawn. And white would probably want to attack on the king side. So, so white, he would want to probably push a few pawns on the king side and probably do something like moving his f pawn or g pawn, or maybe h pawn as well, and positioning his diagonal pieces into an attacking position to attack the black king. So let's say this happened, right? And black, instead of moving the c pawn up, he did some more passive attack, such as, I don't know, moving his bishop from c8 to d7. And now white, he might want to do something like queen g4 to attack the king side, or he might want to do bishop d3, bringing this light squared bishop over to attack. And notice that this light square bishop for white, it's pretty strong because it got all of this space to look at, especially the king side. So bishop d3 is a potential candidate move. Or he could do something like move his pawn to h4. I know that kind of seems a bit weird, but if he's able to move this one pawn, disrupt the king side for black with only one pawn and maybe a few of his other pieces, then it will open up black's king side a lot, and white will have the advantage to attack. Another alternative is just like how we saw black being able to move his pawn c7 to c5, attacking white center. White could also attack black center by moving this f pawn from f2 to f4, and then, I don't know, black will probably do some other move like, I don't know, moving this knight over. And then eventually white could do something such as pawn f5, attacking black center. So the French defense, really tactical. You have a lot of tactics, lots of strategies that you could be forming very early in the game. Just even here right now, we mentioned a few things, how black, he could try to utilize his queenside advantage, kind of, I don't know, bring his knight over and his bishops over and just push all his pawns over. White, he can move his pawns over, or maybe just even one pawn over and try to disrupt the king side, and then eventually bringing his other pieces in to the king side. And so, yeah. And notice how both sides, they have somewhat of a pawn chain in the center. Black has his pawn chain, white has his pawn chain. So notice how some of these strategies might also be revolving around the pawn chains themselves, the center. You might want to disrupt your opponent's pawn chain, so that way your pawn chain in the center could be more, I guess, superior to theirs. Now, another way that this French defense could proceed, instead of having two white pawns on d4 and e5, white could have a pawn on d4 and a knight on e4. And so how would this proceed? So same thing, you're moving these pawns up, e4, e6, d4, d5. Now this position will probably come up with knight c3. And then d takes e4, and you see how this center is not a closed center anymore as compared to the last position. And then knight takes e4. Now here, this is it's considered to be much safer than the last position for white. For black, it doesn't really matter. He's not really in that much of a danger. But for white, he's kind of up in development, and he got a nice center with a knight, a piece in the center, and a pawn on d4, further strengthening its hold on the center. And it's generally more comfortable for white, more space, and he could also use the e5 square as a home for the other knight. So let's say, I don't know, black might want to do some development. I don't know, let's say he wants to try to go for a fianchetto. And then now white, he can move that up, and then I don't know, maybe queenside expansion. And then after white kind of deals with this attack, he can move this knight up from f3 to e5, and that will be a pretty powerful knight center. Knights in the center, both of them in the center, will be pretty powerful, assuming they're protected from the other black pawns. So once again, knight up, pawn takes, and then knight takes. Now, black's counterplay in this would probably have to be something like an attack on the center. He doesn't really have any advantages attacking king side nor on the queen side, because notice that the center isn't that closed. So white also has a pretty powerful center. So with white controlling that center, a queenside push won't be that effective, because white could easily just counter it with his center. So it's also not closed. The position is not closed. There's no pawn chains locked in the center, like the other board. So you can't really safely push these pawns, the queenside pawns, up for black. Now, what you can do is attack the center. So you could do c7 to c5. And this will be this pawn on d4 is going to be kind of a target, pretty weak target, and white will probably have to spend some of its energy defending this. And notice that black, when he moves this c pawn up, it's not only attacking the center, but also it's attacking it can be used to attack the queenside space as well. So you're kind of transitioning the game from the center into the queenside space, and then you could kind of use that to your advantage as black. Notice how also the pawn on d4 for white, it's lying on a half open d file, so assuming this D pawn gets out of it alive from this C7 to C5 push, white will still have to try to defend this pawn because it's really weak on this half-open D file. And so let's say, I don't know, white defends. He uses the strategy that we talked about before, trying to get this knight on f3 to e5, using e5 as a nice home for the knight and having a nice knight center. Now, black's counterplay, continuing on with black's counterplay, would be something like developing this poor c8 bishop who is currently not doing anything because there's a pawn on e6 blocking it. Now what do? You could move this e pawn up, but that's not really going to do much. Generally, people would probably want to do a fianchetto, and it will sometimes come into play when you move b7 to b6, followed by bishop a6. So b7, b6, and then I don't know. Let's say white decides to develop his bishop there, so he could proceed with a queenside push. Now, as black, you could do something like moving your bishop on c8 to a6, and notice that now it's attacking that light squared bishop on d3. And remember how before we said that this light squared bishop was really powerful for white because it had basically unlimited range on the board. Now, if black traded his bad bishop for white's good bishop, he'd finally get even or even have an advantage over white. Now, another way that this could proceed, after moving the knight up, and then after pawn takes, and then knight takes, now black might also want to do something, another fianchetto. So after b7 to b6, and white might want to do something like knight to f3. Now black could do bishop to b7, and the bishop on b7 would have a nice range. It's becoming a better bishop than it was on c8, and it got a nice diagonal to look at, and it also kind of passively attacks white's center, specifically his knight. So now black kind of is attacking white's center while white has to defend his center, which is a theme common in other openings as well. So there's many ideas that could branch from the French defense. Sometimes it's an outright attack on the king. Other times it's a passive attack on the center, where black is allowing white to grow his center and trying to subtly nip at white's center, as shown in other openings. Now, black, also black could do something. So after knight moves up, and then pawn takes, and then knight takes, black could do something like bishop from c8 to d7, and then to c6. And even though that kind of looks weird, it does seem better to be in a fianchetto, but the bishop on c6 would also um, nicely control this long diagonal a8 to h1, and also this diagonal a4 to e8, and that will further strengthen black's queenside push, because now the bishop is looking at the square b the b5 square and the a4 square, and black could push the two pawns up to those squares. So that will be about it for today's video. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it and learned a lot about the French defense. Really strategical opening, got a lot of possibilities, and each game is almost entirely different. So if you guys enjoyed this video and learned a lot, leave a like, subscribe, and click that notifications bell to see more chess videos.